Did you ever wake up to find a bright red paper taped to your front door? Now imagine that door is on a boat, your boat, and the paper says, "Must relocate immediately." In Comic Sans font, that's how I found out. The local HOA had declared war on me. Why? Because my legally docked sailboat was apparently interfering with their community fishing aesthetics. One clipboard-wielding woman named Charlotte decided she could strong-arm me into giving up my SP, except she picked the wrong target. What started as a petty HOA notice spiraled into a full-blown campaign of intimidation, fines, sabotage, and something none of them saw coming. Ever dealt with an HOA tyrant who thought they ruled the world? Drop a comment below and tell me your story. This one's going to hit home. Let me back up and give you the full picture. My name is Nathan Ford. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 3 years I've been living what most people would call the dream. I made a decent chunk of money developing mobile apps, those silly games and productivity tools that somehow go viral and make more money than you'd expect. After years of grinding in the tech world, I finally had enough saved up to buy myself a beautiful 32 FT sailboat that I named Exodus. The name felt fitting because it represented my escape from the corporate rat race and into a life of freedom on the water paradise. Marina has been my home base for those 3 years, and honestly, it's been nothing short of perfect. Jim Parker, the owner and operator, is one of those genuinely good guys you rarely meet these days. Former Navy engineer who bought the place about 10 years ago. As his retirement dream, the Marina has 40 slips for boats. And it's always been this tight-knit community where everyone looks out for each other. We've got weekend barbecues, help each other with boat maintenance, and there's never been any drama or conflict. It's the kind of place where you can actually relax and enjoy life without worrying about petty neighborhood politics or power games. The Marina sits right next to Riverside Commons, which is this development of about 200 townhouses that went up maybe 15 years ago. Most of the residents are decent people, young families, retirees, working professionals who just want to live their lives in peace. The problem started about 3 years ago when Charlotte Wallace got elected as the HOA president. At first, she seemed harmless enough, but gradually she started treating the position like she was running a small kingdom instead of a neighborhood association. She began implementing more and more rules, finding people for the smallest infractions, and generally making life miserable for anyone who didn't fall in line with her vision of how the community should operate. That Monday morning, I woke up on my boat like I do every day, made my coffee, and was planning to spend the morning working on some code for a new app. That's when I noticed the bright red paper practically glowing against the white fiberglass of my boat's hull. The paper had this fancy-looking letterhead that said Riverside Commons Homeowners Association in bold letters, and underneath in that ridiculous Comic Sans font was a message that made my blood pressure spike. Mandatory relocation notice. 48 hours. The vessel currently occupying Slip 27 must be relocated to accommodate community fishing activities. Failure to comply will result in enforcement action. The whole thing was signed with a flourish by Charlotte Wallace, HOA president, like she was signing some kind of royal decree. My first thought was that this had to be some kind of joke. I mean, who just demands that someone move their legally parked boat because they want to use the space for something else? It's like telling someone to move their car out of their assigned parking spot because you want to set up a lemonade stand. I grabbed my phone and called Jim immediately. When he picked up, I could hear the frustration in his voice before I even explained why I was calling Nathan. I was wondering when you'd see that thing. Charlotte dropped it off about an hour ago, made a big show of taping it to your boat while I was working on the docks. I told her she had no authority to post anything on private marina property. but she just ignored me and kept talking about community rights and proper marine facility management. I asked Jim about my lease agreement, even though I already knew the answer. I've been paying my slip fees on time, every month for 3 years, never caused any problems, never violated any Marina rules, and my contract runs for another 14 months with an option to renew. Jim confirmed what I already knew. My lease is completely legitimate, properly executed, and Charlotte's little HOA has absolutely zero authority over Marina operation. The Marina predates their development by decades, and there's no legal mechanism for them to force anyone to move their boat. Jim also mentioned something that made my antenna go up. She's been coming around here 3 times this week, asking questions about your lease, taking pictures, measuring distances from your slip to the shore. I think she's planning something bigger than just this notice. I spent the rest of the morning digging through my paperwork and doing some research online. Everything confirmed what I already suspected. This was pure harassment with no legal basis whatsoever. Charlotte was trying to use intimidation and the appearance of authority to bully me into giving up my rights. The more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. This wasn't just about my boat slip. This was about someone thinking they could push people around just because they had a clipboard and a fancy title. I decided needed to pay Miss Wallace a visit and have a civilized conversation about property rights and the limits of HOA authority as I was getting ready to head over to the HOA office. Jim walked up to my boat with a worried expression on his face. "Nathan," he said, quietly, looking around to make sure nobody was listening, "I need to tell you something. After Charlotte left this morning, she made a phone call right there on the dock. I couldn't help but overhear her saying something about Phase 2 and how she needed to apply more pressure to make him understand. I don't know what she's planning, but I don't think this red paper is the end of it. She's got that look in her eye like she's on some kind of mission. And in my experience, people like that don't stop until they get what they want, or someone makes them stop." The HOA office is located in a cramped room inside the Riverside Commons Community Center, which is basically a glorified clubhouse with a gym meeting room and a few offices for the management company. As I walked through the parking lot, I noticed Charlotte's car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic, with a custom license plate that read HOA Boss, and I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony. Here's someone driving a beat-up economy car, but trying to project this image of authority and power over an entire community. I did a little research on Charlotte before coming over, and what I found painted an interesting picture of someone who had experienced a significant fall from grace and was now trying to reclaim some sense of control and status through her HOA position. Charlotte used to be a successful reeler with a luxury lifestyle until the crash, the divorce, and a forced move to a modest townhouse. She'd lost her power, and the HOA presidency became her new throne when I walked into the HOA office. Charlotte was sitting behind a desk that was way too big for the small room, with 3 computer monitors arranged like she was running some kind of high-tech operation instead of managing a couple hundred townhouses behind an oversized desk. Charlotte brandished her red clipboard like a scepter. The room screamed over compensation. "More cosplay than command center, Mr. Ford," she said, without looking up from her computer. "I was expecting you'd show up eventually. Please have a seat." I remained standing and pulled out my phone to record the conversation, which immediately got her attention. "I'm here to discuss the notice you left on my boat this morning," I said calmly. "I'm hoping there's been some kind of misunderstanding, because according to my lease agreement and federal maritime law, you don't have any authority to order me to move my vessel." Charlotte finally looked up from her screen and gave me this condescending smile that I'm sure she practiced in the mirror. "Mr. Ford, you seem to be confused about how communities work. Individual preferences cannot override collective needs. The waterfront area adjacent to our community needs to be available for our residents, recreational activities, and your boat is disrupting the peaceful enjoyment of that space. I asked her to show me the specific regulation or law that gave her the authority to override a private marina lease. And that's when things got interesting. Instead of producing any kind of documentation, she started talking in circles about community standards and aesthetic considerations and the greater good. When I pressed her for specifics, she pivoted to a different attack angle. Mr. Ford, your boat is creating an unsightly visual impact on our waterfront. Ambience, the colors don't complement the natural beauty of the area, and several residents have complained about the disruption to their peaceful enjoyment of the community amenities. I almost laughed out loud at this point because my boat is white with blue trim, literally the most common color scheme for sailboats in existence. If you look around any marina in America, probably 90% of the boats are some variation of white and blue. That's when Charlotte played what she clearly thought was her trump card. She opened that red clipboard of hers and pulled out an official-looking document. Mr. Ford, as of today, you're being fined $800 for violation of community aesthetic standards, as outlined in Section 12.3 of the Riverside Commons Residential Guidelines. She slid the paper across the desk with this smug expression like she just delivered a checkmate move. I picked up the paper and looked at it carefully. The formatting was professional. The language was official sounding. But there was one small problem. I'm not a resident of Riverside Commons. I don't own property in their development, and I'm not subject to their guidelines or regulations. I'm a customer of a private marina that happens to be located next to their community. I explained this to Charlotte as patiently as I could, but she just waved her hand dismissively. Mr. Ford, you're clearly not understanding the bigger picture here. When your activities impact our community, you become subject to our oversight. We have discretionary authority to address situations that affect the quality of life for our residents. I realized at this point that either Charlotte genuinely didn't understand the legal boundaries of her authority, or she was deliberately trying to intimidate me with fake power, hoping I'd just give up and comply rather than fight back. Either way, it was clear that reason and logic weren't going to work with this woman. As I got up to leave, I told Charlotte that I wouldn't be paying the fine and I wouldn't be moving my boat, since both demands were legally baseless. Her expression shifted from smug confidence to barely controlled anger. Mr. Ford, she said, in a voice that was trying to sound threatening, I strongly suggest you reconsider your position. We have various methods at our disposal to encourage cooperation from people who refuse to work with the community. It would be much easier for everyone if you simply did the right thing voluntarily. As I walked toward the door, I heard her pick up her phone and start dialing. Hi, Jim, this is Charlotte from the HOA. We need to have a conversation about marina policies and community cooperation. Are you available to meet this afternoon? I called my friend Alyssa Carter. As soon as I got back to my boat, Alyssa and I went to college together, and she's now a corporate lawyer who specializes in property disputes and contract law. I figured it would be smart to get some professional advice. Before this situation escalated any further, after I explained what had happened, Alyssa was quiet for a moment before she started laughing. Nathan, you're completely in the right here, but I have to warn you, people like Charlotte don't stop just because they're wrong. She's probably going to try to make your life difficult in ways that have nothing to do with the law. Document everything, keep records of all your interactions, and don't let her bait you into doing anything stupid. If she pushes too hard, we can always file harassment charges, but let's hope it doesn't come to that. 3 days later, I learned exactly what Elisa meant about Charlotte not stopping just because she was wrong. Jim called me around 8 here in the morning, and I could hear the stress in his voice. Immediately, "Nathan, I'm really sorry about this, but I've got to cut off the electricity and water to your slip. Charlotte came by yesterday afternoon with 3 other HOA board members, and they're threatening to organize a boycott of the Marina if I don't cooperate with their community standards. Enforcement. They're also talking about filing complaints with the county about supposed health and safety violations, and they've promised to leave negative reviews on every website they can find. I can't afford to lose business right now, especially with Carol's medical situation getting worse." I understood Jim's position completely. His wife, Carol, has been battling cancer for the past year, and the treatment costs have been devastating, even with insurance. The Marina provides their primary income, and he can't risk having a bunch of angry HOA members trying to destroy his business over something that has nothing to do with him. I told Jim not to worry about it and that I'd figure out how to manage without utilities for a while. What really bothered me wasn't the inconvenience. It was the fact that Charlotte was willing to hurt innocent people to get what she wanted. Jim had nothing to do with our dispute, but she was perfectly happy to threaten his livelihood as a weapon against me. That evening there was a regularly scheduled HOA meeting at the community centre, and I decided to attend as a guest to present my side of the story. The meeting room was packed with about 40 residents, and the tension in the air was obvious. From the moment I walked in, Charlotte was presiding over the meeting from the front of the room, that red clipboard in her hand like a scepter, and she had clearly been building up the drama around this boat situation for maximum effect. When it came time for new business, she launched into this elaborate presentation about how my boat was disrupting the harmony of the community and threatening property values for everyone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charlotte said in her most official voice, "we have a situation that requires immediate community action. There is an individual who has refused to cooperate with reasonable requests to relocate his vessel away from our waterfront area. This person has shown complete disregard for our community standards and has been unresponsive to diplomatic efforts to resolve the situation amicably. We cannot allow outside agitators to dictate terms to our community or undermine the peaceful enjoyment of our common areas." The way she described the situation, you'd think I was some kind of terrorist who had invaded their peaceful neighborhood with a battleship instead of a guy who pays rent. To park his sailboat at a private marina when Charlotte finished her presentation, I asked for permission to respond, and surprisingly, she allowed it. I stood up and calmly explained that I had a legal lease agreement with the marina, that the HOA had no jurisdiction over marina operations, and that I had never violated any actual rules or regulations. I brought copies of my lease agreement and showed them to anyone who wanted to see them. I also pointed out that Charlotte's fine was legally meaningless since I'm not a resident of their community and not subject to their internal guidelines. Several residents seemed genuinely surprised to learn these facts, and I could see some of them starting to question whether Charlotte had been completely honest about the situation, but Charlotte had clearly prepared for this moment. She immediately shifted the conversation away from legal technicalities and toward emotional appeals about community solidarity and protecting their investment. "In the neighborhood, this isn't about legal technicalities," she said dramatically. "This is about whether we're going to stand together as a community or allow outsiders to walk all over us every day that boat sits. There is a day that our families can't fully enjoy the waterfront amenities that we pay for through our HOA fees. Are we going to let one person's selfishness override the needs of 200 families?" When she put it to a vote, 26 residents voted to support taking stronger action, while 14 voted against, with several others abstaining after the vote. Charlotte announced that the HOA would be implementing Phase 2 of their enforcement strategy. She had clearly been planning this escalation all along, and the meeting was just theatre. To give her actions a veneer of community support, effective immediately, she declared, "We will be suspending all courtesy services to non-cooperative individuals and implementing enhanced monitoring of the waterfront area to ensure compliance with community standards." I asked what exactly that meant, and Charlotte just smiled and said I'd find out soon enough. The next morning, I discovered what Phase 2 looked like. Jim had to cut off my electricity and water, as threatened, which meant I was suddenly living like it was the 1800s. No utilities meant working from the boat became nearly impossible. I started missing deadlines and losing connection during client meetings, but the real psychological warfare came from Charlotte's enhanced monitoring program throughout the day. I'd see HOA residents walking by the marina taking pictures of my boat, measuring distances from my slip to the shore, and generally making their presence known. It was like living under surveillance, and I'm sure that was exactly the effect Charlotte was going for. She wanted me to feel isolated, harassed, and uncomfortable until I finally gave up and moved somewhere else. What she didn't realize was that her escalation tactics were actually making me more determined to fight back, not less. By the end of the week, Jim pulled me aside for a private conversation that would change everything. "Nathan," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something that I probably shouldn't. Carol's condition has gotten worse, and the doctors are recommending an experimental treatment that costs $200.
0 insurance won't cover it, and our savings are already wiped out from the previous treatments. I've been thinking about selling the marina, but I don't want it to fall into the wrong hands. If someone like Charlotte got control of this place, she'd
turn it into her personal kingdom and make life miserable for everyone." The conversation with Jim hit me harder than I expected, and not just because of the personal tragedy his family was facing. As I sat on my boat that night using a battery-powered
lantern to read, because Charlotte had succeeded in cutting off my electricity, I started thinking about the bigger picture. This wasn't just about my boat slip anymore. It was about what happens when someone with a little bit of power decides they
can steamroll over anyone who gets in their way. Charlotte had escalated from bureaucratic harassment to economic warfare, and she was perfectly willing to hurt innocent people like Jim and Carol to get what she wanted. The next morning, I woke up to discover that Charlotte had moved to what I can only describe as outright sabotage. During the night, someone had cut the lines securing my boat to the dock, and if I hadn't woken up when I did, the exodus would have drifted out into the main channel of the river. The dock lines are thick, expensive rope that doesn't just break on its own. Someone had deliberately cut through them with a knife or other sharp tool. I also found scratches along the hull of my boat that looked fresh, and when I checked my navigation equipment, I discovered that someone had tampered with my GPS system and damaged the wiring to my radio. The estimated cost to repair all the damage was around $12, which would normally be covered by insurance, but proving that it was deliberate sabotage rather than an accident or vandalism by random troublemakers would be nearly impossible. I called the police and filed a report, but without security cameras or witnesses, there wasn't much they could do except document the incident. The timing was awfully convenient, though. The sabotage happened exactly 1 week after Charlotte's Phase 2 announcement, and everyone at the marina knew that my boat had become the focal point of the HOA's harassment campaign. Jim was furious when he saw the damage. "This crossed every line," he said, examining the cut dock lines. "I don't care what kind of pressure they're putting on me. I can't allow people to destroy customer property on my marina. This isn't about HOA politics anymore. This is criminal activity." That afternoon, Jim called Charlotte and told her that the enhanced monitoring program was no longer welcome on Marina property and that any further incidents would result in trespassing charges. Charlotte's response was predictable. She denied any involvement in the sabotage and suggested that maybe I had damaged my own boat to make the HOA look bad. But Jim's confrontation with Charlotte accelerated the timeline for everything that happened next that evening. He called me with news that would change the
entire dynamic of the situation. Nathan, I've made a decision about selling the Marina. Carol's doctors say we need to start the treatment within the next month. And I can't wait around hoping that insurance will change their mind or that we'll find
some other way to raise the money. The problem is, Charlotte has been sniffing around asking questions about the Marina's financial situation and whether I'd be willing to sell to community-minded buyers. I think she's trying to organize some kind
of group purchase through the HOA, but there's no way they have that kind of money. I asked Jim what he thought the Marina was worth. And after thinking about it for a moment, he said probably around $750.
The property includes not just the dock facilities, but also the marina building, the boat launch, and about 3 acres of waterfront land. It generates steady income from the 40 boat slips. And with some improvements in marketing, it could probably be even more profitable, most importantly for Jim's situation. He could sell it quickly to the right buyer and have the money Carol needed for her treatment. That's when the idea hit me like a lightning bolt. Jim, I said slowly, what if I bought the Marina? He was quiet for a long moment, and I could almost hear him processing the implications. Nathan, are you serious? Do you have that kind of money? I explained that I'd been more successful with my app development business than most people realized. A couple of my apps had gone viral and generated serious revenue. Plus, I'd been smart about investing the money instead of blowing it on fancy cars and expensive gadgets. I had enough in savings and investment to make a cash offer that would give Jim the money he needed immediately. The more we talked about it, the more sense it made. Jim could stay on as the Marina manager, which would give him a steady income and health insurance. While Carol went through her treatment, I'd get a solid investment. Property that generated passive income, plus I'd have complete control over Marina policies and wouldn't have to worry about anyone trying to kick me out of my slip. Most importantly, it would end Charlotte's harassment campaign permanently because she'd no longer have any leverage over Jim or the Marina operations. We agreed to meet with Alyssa the next day to discuss the legal aspects and start the process of drawing up a purchase agreement. Jim was clearly relieved to have a solution that
didn't involve selling to strangers or dealing with Charlotte's schemes, he said. As we shook hands, I think Carol's going to love this idea. She's been so worried about what would happen to the Marina community if we had to sell to the wrong people, knowing that you'll be taking care of the place and the people who dock here. That's going to give her real peace of mind during her recovery that night. As I sat on my boat, planning out the details of becoming a Marina owner, I realized
that Charlotte's escalation tactics had backfired spectacularly. By pushing too hard and too fast, she had forced a situation where I went from being a passive victim of harassment to someone who was about to gain complete control over the battlefield. Instead of driving me away from the Marina, her harassment had motivated me to buy the entire property and permanently end her ability to interfere with Marina operations. I also started thinking about what I would do once the purchase was complete. Obviously, the first order of business would be to restore utility service to all the boat slips and make it clear that the Marina was open to everyone, not just people who kowtowed to Charlotte's demands. But beyond that, I wanted to turn the Marina into the kind of community space that Jim had always envisioned, a place where people could enjoy boating and waterfront activities without having to deal with petty politics or power games. The irony was perfect. Charlotte's attempt to expand her control over the waterfront was about to result in her losing all influence over Marina operations forever. The next morning, Charlotte made one final escalation that sealed her fate. I woke up to find a certified letter taped to my boat announcing that the HOA was exploring legal options to address the ongoing disruption of community amenities by non-cooperative individuals. The letter threatened unspecified enforcement actions and demanded that I contact their attorney within 48 hours to discuss resolution term. It was clearly an attempt to intimidate me with the threat of expensive legal proceedings, but Charlotte had no idea that she was threatening someone who was about to become her landlord. The meeting with Elisa went even better than I had hoped. After reviewing the Marina's financial records and Jim's ownership documents, she confirmed that the property was exactly what Jim claimed it to be, a profitable, well-maintained business with clean legal title and no outstanding
liens or complications. The asking price of $720,000
was actually below market value for waterfront commercial property, but Jim was more interested in finding the right buyer than maximizing his profit. We structured the deal so that I would pay cash for a quick closing, and Jim would stay on as Marina manager with a salary of $55 per year plus health benefits. While we were working out the legal details, Charlotte was busy escalating her harassment campaign to new levels of ridiculousness. She started posting on neighborhood social media groups about the ongoing Marina situation and encouraging residents to avoid the area until the uncooperative boat owner could be removed. She sent residents to loiter near the marina, trying to intimidate customers with pointless surveillance. The most absurd part of Charlotte's escalation was when she contacted the county health department, claiming that my boat was creating unsanitary conditions because I was living without municipal water and sewer connections. A health inspector actually came out to investigate, took one look at my boat's self-contained waste and water systems, and told Charlotte that there was absolutely nothing wrong with my setup. Marine sanitation systems are specifically designed for this purpose and are actually cleaner and more environmentally friendly than many land-based alternatives. The inspector also mentioned that filing false reports was a misdemeanor offense, which shut down that particular avenue of harassment pretty quickly. But Charlotte's most desperate move came when she tried to organize an economically boycott of the marina. She sent letters to all the current slip renters, encouraging them to terminate their leases and find alternative dock space until the marina management demonstrates a commitment to community cooperation. The problem with this strategy was that most of the boat owners actually supported me and thought Charlotte was completely out of line. Several of them had dealt with her harassment over the years and were happy to see someone finally standing up to her instead of driving business away from the marina. Her boycott attempt actually strengthened the sense of community among the boat owners and turned them into allies against HOA overreach. During the week that we were processing the paperwork for the marina purchase, I maintained my routine of living without utilities and dealing with Charlotte's surveillance patrols. I wanted to keep everything as normal as possible until the deal was finalized, partly to avoid tipping off Charlotte about what was happening, but mostly because I was enjoying the psychological game at this point. Every morning I'd wave cheerfully at whatever HOA member was hanging around taking pictures, and I'd go about my business as if their harassment campaign was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The closing took place on a Friday afternoon at Elisa's law office, and it was probably the most satisfying business transaction of my life. Jim signed over the deed. I transferred $720,000 from my investment account, and just like that I became the owner of Paradise Marina. Jim looked like a massive weight had been lifted off his shoulders, and he immediately called Carol to tell her that they could start scheduling her treatment. "Nathan," he said, as we shook
hands outside the law office, "you just saved my wife's life. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this."
I told him that taking good care of the marina and its community was all the repayment I needed. That same afternoon, I called an emergency meeting for all the slip renters. Word had spread quickly through the marina community that something big was happening, and 35 people showed up. To see what was going on, I stood up in front of the group and made the announcement that would change everything. Ladies and gentlemen, as of this afternoon, I am the new owner of Paradise Marina. I want to assure everyone that all existing lease agreements will be honored and renewed on the same terms you've been enjoying. However, there is one arrangement that will not be continuing: the special accommodation that has been extended to the Riverside Commons HOA Fishing Club. The reaction was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Most of the boat owners started applauding, and several of them came up afterward to congratulate me and express their relief that the marina would continue operating as the friendly, lowbrow community it had always been. A few people asked about the HOA situation, and I explained that while individual HOA residents would always be welcome at the marina as paying customers, the organization would no longer have any special privileges or influence over marina operations. Word of the ownership change spread through the Riverside Commons community like wildfire within an hour of our meeting. My phone started ringing with calls from HOA residents, some congratulating me, some asking questions, and a few expressing concern about what the change would mean for community relations. I assured everyone that the marina would continue to be a good neighbor and that individual residents were welcome to use marina facilities under the same terms as anyone else. The only thing that was changing was that the HOA organization would no longer have special access or influence over marina policies. Scarlett's reaction was swift and predictable. About 45 minutes after I made the announcement to the slip renters, I saw her marching across the marina parking lot with 4 other HOA board members in tow. She was carrying that red clipboard and had the expression of someone who was about to deliver an ultimatum. "Mr. Ford," she said in her most authoritative voice, "I need to speak with you immediately about this unauthorized change in marina ownership. The HOA has agreements and understandings with this facility that cannot be unilaterally terminated." I let Charlotte and her entourage vent for a few minutes about their rights and agreements before I calmly explained that they were now standing on private property that I owned and that their only right was to leave if I asked them to. I pulled out the official ownership transfer documents and showed them to Charlotte, whose expression shifted from angry authority to shocked disbelief as she realized what had happened. This can't be legal," she stammered. "You can't just buy a marina to get out of following community guidelines." I pointed out that there were security cameras recording our conversation and that she was currently trespassing on private property. After being asked to leave before Charlotte and her group departed, I handed her an official notice that Alyssa had prepared, effective immediately all special arrangements between Paradise Marina and Riverside Commons. HOA are terminated. The HOA Fishing Club has 30 days to remove all equipment and personal property from marina premises. Future access to marina facilities will be available to individual residents under standard commercial term. Charlotte read the notice twice, crumpled it up, and threw it on the ground before storming off. As I watched her retreat, I realized that the real battle was just beginning. The 30-day countdown period turned into the most entertaining month I'd had in years. Charlotte's reaction to losing her marina leverage was like watching someone go through all 5 stages of grief simultaneously. With an extra helping of entitled rage thrown in for good measure, her first strategy was denial. She spent the first week insisting that my purchase of the marina was somehow illegal or invalid, and that proper authorities would straighten out the situation. Soon enough, when that didn't work, she moved on to bargaining, offering to pay increasingly ridiculous amounts of money for continued HOA access to marina facilities. Charlotte tried bargaining, throwing out increasingly desperate offers. For fishing access, I declined them all. This wasn't about money, it was about not rewarding. Harassment with privilege. While Charlotte cycled through her denial and bargaining phases, I restored utilities and modernized the Marina. Word spread quickly, and by week 3, we were nearly full. Charlotte's response to the Marina's success was, to double down on her obstruction tactics, she organized what she called informational pickets outside the Marina entrance, where HOA members would hold signs warning people about uncooperative management and anti-com community policy. The problem with this strategy was that most people driving by had no idea what the signs were talking about, and the few who stopped to ask questions usually ended up sympathizing with me rather than with Charlotte. Several potential customers actually told me that seeing organized opposition from an HOA made them more interested in doing business with the Marina. Not less, the most satisfying part of the 30-day period was watching Charlotte's support within the HOA community begin to crumble as word spread about exactly what had happened, that Charlotte had harassed a Marina customer to the point where he bought the entire facility to escape her control. Many residents started questioning whether she was really representing their interest. Several HOA members approached me privately to apologize for Charlotte's behavior and to ask about becoming Marina customers themselves. It turned out that a lot of people in the community owned boats or were interested in waterfront activities, but had been discouraged by Charlotte's territorial attitude toward the Marina Jim's wife. Carol was responding well to her treatment, which was the best news of all. The experimental therapy was expensive and exhausting, but the early results were encouraging, and having the financial stress removed had made the whole process more manageable for their family. Jim threw himself into his work as Marina manager with renewed energy, and his enthusiasm was contagious throughout the Marina community. He organized weekend barbecues, coordinated group boating trips, and generally helped create the kind of welcoming atmosphere that made people want to spend time at the Marina with only days left. Charlotte proposed a desperate HOA buy-in to regain Marina access 50,000 per year. The community flatly rejected it. The meeting quickly turned into a reckoning, exposing months of overreach under Charlotte's rule. Calls for her removal followed on day 28 of the countdown. Charlotte made her final offer. She would personally guarantee that there would be no further conflicts between the HOA and the Marina if I would allow the fishing club to continue operating under a minimal impact arrangement. She seemed genuinely surprised when I explained that the issue had never been about the fishing club. Specifically, it was about her pattern of harassment and intimidation. If she had approached the situation respectfully from the beginning and worked collaboratively to address any legitimate concerns, we probably could have worked something out. But after weeks of deliberate harassment, property damage, and economic warfare, trust was no longer possible. Charlotte's final response was predictably dramatic. "Mr. Ford," she said, "during our last face-to-face conversation, you think you've won something here, but this isn't over. Communities have long memories, and your hostile takeover of our Marina won't be forgotten." I reminded her that I hadn't taken over there. Marina I had purchased a privately owned business that had never belonged to the HOA in the first place. "The only thing that's ending here," I told her, "is your ability to harass people who don't submit to your authority. The Marina will continue to be a good neighbor to the community, but it will never again be subject to the whims of HOA politics." Day 30 arrived on a beautiful Saturday morning. In late spring, Charlotte and 2 remaining loyal HOA board members showed up with a small truck to remove the fishing club's equipment from the designated area near my boat slip. Chapter 7, Judgment Day 1, 100 words. The final showdown was surprisingly anticlimactic. Charlotte arrived at exactly 9 in the morning with a small rental truck and 2 of her most loyal HOA board members ready to remove the fishing club's equipment from Marina property. Gone was the self-proclaimed queen with the red notice in her place. Stood someone tired, defeated, and unsure how it all unraveled. In her place was someone who looked tired, defeated, and genuinely confused about how things had gone so wrong for her. She moved through the process, methodically loading folding chairs, fishing gear coolers, and the ridiculous HOA members, only signs that she had installed around what she thought was her personal fishing spot. I watched the whole operation from my boat, drinking coffee and catching up on email, but I made sure to be visible and professionally courteous throughout the process. When Charlotte struggled with a particularly heavy cooler, I walked over and offered to help, which seemed to catch her completely off guard. "Mr. Ford," she said, "what you did was wrong. Communities should work together, not be disrupted by outsiders." I handed her one end of the cooler and helped her carry it to the truck while explaining that I had never been an outsider. I had been a paying customer of the Marina for 3 years before she decided to make me an enemy. As Charlotte and her helpers finished loading their equipment, I presented her with a final piece of paperwork that Elisa had prepared. "This is a formal trespass notice," I explained calmly. "It doesn't apply to you personally as long as you're not representing the HOA or trying to exercise authority over Marina operations. If you want to come back as an individual customer to rent a boat slip or use Marina facilities, you're welcome to do that under the same terms as anyone else, but any future attempts to assert HOA control over Marina property will result in police involvement." Charlotte read the document carefully, folded it up, and put it in her pocket without comment. The aftermath of Charlotte's removal from the Marina was swift and decisive. Within 2 weeks of the 30-day deadline, the Riverside Commons HOA held a special election that resulted in Charlotte being voted out of the presidency by a margin of more than 2-1. The new HOA leadership immediately reached out to me to apologize for the previous administration's behavior and to explore ways that the Marina and the community could work together more constructively. We ended up establishing a partnership where individual HOA residents receive a small discount on Marina services, and the Marina sponsors several community events throughout the year. 3 months after taking ownership of the Marina, I was sitting on the deck of the Exodus, watching one of the most beautiful sunsets I'd ever seen. Over the water, the Marina was busier and more profitable than it had ever been under Jim's ownership, with a waiting list of people who wanted to rent slips and a calendar full of community events and group activities. Jim's wife Carol had completed her treatment successfully and was making a strong recovery, which meant that Jim was back to his cheerful, energetic self and throwing himself into Marina management with renewed passion. The transformation of the Marina from a quiet, somewhat neglected facility to a thriving waterfront community center had exceeded my wildest expectations. We were hosting weekend barbecues that drew people from all over the region, organizing group sailing trips for beginners, and generally creating the kind of welcoming atmosphere that made people want to spend time on the water. The fishing area that Charlotte had fought so hard to control was now open to everyone, and it had become a popular spot for families to teach their kids how to fish and for retirees to spend peaceful afternoons by the water. Charlotte's fate after leaving the HOA presidency was both predictable and somehow fitting. Without the power and status that came from being the community leader, she seemed to lose interest in neighborhood politics entirely. Several residents mentioned seeing her driving slowly past the Marina on weekends, apparently watching the activity from a distance, but she never stopped or tried to cause any further problems. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had put her townhouse up for sale and was planning to move to a different community where she could start fresh without the baggage of her reputation as an overreaching HOA dictator. The most satisfying part wasn't the money, it was proving that standing up to bullies sparks lasting positive change, it was the realization that standing up to bullies and refusing to be intimidated can create positive changes that extend far beyond the original conflict. The Marina community was stronger and more welcoming than ever. The relationship between the Marina and the neighborhood was better than it had been in years, and dozens of people were enjoying waterfront activities who might never have had the opportunity if Charlotte had succeeded in turning the area into her personal kingdom. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized that Charlotte's biggest mistake wasn't underestimating my resources or my determination to fight back. Her biggest mistake was assuming that she could use fear and intimidation to control people without any consequences she had gotten away with. Bullying behavior for so long that she genuinely believed she was untouchable, and that arrogance led her to escalate a simple dispute into a war that she was destined to lose if she had approached the situation with respect and a willingness to compromise. We probably could have worked out an arrangement that everyone could live with. The final twist in the story came about 6 months later when I received a phone call from the owner of another marina about 20 minutes up the river. Apparently, word had spread throughout the regional boating community about my HOA management techniques, and this owner was dealing with a similar situation involving an aggressive neighborhood association that was trying to assert control over his facility. He wanted to know if I'd be interested in consulting on marina management and community relations, which seemed like a potentially lucrative side business to add to my app development work. Looking back on the whole experience, I can honestly say that Charlotte Walls did me a tremendous favor by forcing me to take control of my situation instead of just enduring her harassment. Sometimes the best way to deal with people who abuse their power isn't to fight them on their terms, but to change the rules of the game entirely. And sometimes when someone tries to make your life miserable, the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting everything. Drop a comment below and let me know what you would have done in my situation. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing up to entitled neighbors.